Picture the following scenario. It's summer. It's 100 degrees outside. You're about to go for a walk and you need to pick your clothes. These are your options. Option 1. Yeah, quite coated, right? I'm sure the heat won't make it through these layers. I'm sure about that. Option 2. Which is a little lighter. Yeah, probably a little fresher too. And more comfortable. Yeah, comfortable. Alright, now let's go to the park, you silly animals. Let me grab my coat. Where did I put it? Hi everyone, this is Xylee the Fox, and welcome to a brand new video. From a comfort and dynamic perspective, fursuiting makes absolutely not any sense at all. Despite the joke at the beginning of the video, I believe putting on a fursuit and walking out the streets during a hot day is, yeah, quite dangerous. So why do we first seem to invest in doing such things so much?
Because it's fun, you cranky old fox. Have fun for once in your life.
She's always so cute.
Joking. Love you.
Well, thanks for the joke, friend. Now, on a serious note though, after sitting down, talking with some friends, and carefully thinking about it, I have come to the conclusion that fursuiting makes sense in its own way. Fursuiting is a practice that has a purpose on its own and only works to serve that purpose alone. Through the years, this purpose has been reshaped and the meaning behind it shifted accordingly to satisfy a clear need in each time period that it actually represented. Anyone who has been in this fandom for a while knows that furries have been present online for decades. But before the internet era, the furry fandom was mainly regional and analogic. This means that records online are quite sparse, and fursuiting, from what I've read, was not the main attraction. During the early ages of our community, the notable names from that era are remembered primarily as artists, like the case of Sean Keller, whose work as a freelance animator and illustrator contributed to the creation of the iconic Roar Browser magazine back in 1983. The records online, therefore, documented the furry scene as a movement that was still under development. That is to say, the first meetups were being created, the first art was being produced, and the whole meaning behind the artistic nature of fur fandom was under construction mainly. In that context, fursuit performers were not yet a core pillar as they are nowadays. And that is the key word for the need fursuiting covered in the 80s. Fursuiting was just a way to stay in character. So based on the historical material available, the direct influence towards anthropomorphic animals in what may resemble what nowadays we can call a fursuit were mainly mascots. Disney or sport teams characters were strong angles which heavily influenced early performances in our community, and to the day you can see online that mascoting still plays an important role as a side hobby for some fursuiters. Some of the first documented fursuiters, such as Robert Hill, who was the co-founder of Roar Browser together with Sean Keller, came from a background in character entertainment. In this nature, the suit was not simply something to wear, but rather a tool to portray a character through movement, pantomime, and we could also say interaction. As such, early furry costuming emerged at a time when the fandom itself revolved around cartoon animals and fiction. So stepping into a suit was often less about showing who you were and more about bringing a character to life. This meant that the value of a fursuit was measured not much by how it looked, but by how convincingly its wearer could perform inside of it. As a result, many of the earliest fursuits treated the suit as an extension of a role, let's say, encouraging a culture where staying in character became one of the defining purposes of fursuiting during its first years. From what I understood based on my reading, was that the goal was not simply to be seen wearing a costume, but to convince others that the character had stepped out of the page and into the real world. In the 80s, we can therefore say, fursuiting was just performative. Now, one big aspect of staying in character was to be convincing. Consequently, and in order to meet that need, early fursuiting tacitly laid out clear, group understood rules, among which we could find vocals and sounds, which could explain the origin of silent suiters nowadays, or maybe squeaky suits, no poodling, and the one that still stands to the day in more traditional spaces of the fandom, me included for some reason sometimes, no breaking the magic. Now, yeah, this one is a sacred one, bear in mind. As time goes on, trends tend to shift and logics tend to illogically change as well. Although this performative nature of the furry fandom started strictly as day and night given its implicit rules, the question arises, how did it all change? I believe the nature of this shift relies on the fact that fursuiting evolved from performance to self-expression and consequently to identity within the furry fandom. What was it that a costume represented back in the day? Well, we could say characters, mascots, external figures that were the means through which the 80s furries had fun and performed. Nowadays, what is it that a fursuit represents? Huh? Yeah, you got it! A persona! But hey, don't get me wrong, my main argument is not that performance disappeared altogether, but that performance stopped being the primary goal, and the need now is a combination of both, playing, but at the same time expressing yourself. As personas became central to the fandom during the 1990s and the early 2000s, fursuiting increasingly became a way of physically embodying a personal identity rather than portraying a separate character for an audience, as it used to be. To quote some authorities, Wikifirst, okay. Wikifirst's own definition of a persona describes it as the character, alter ego why not, or identity associated with a person, and notes that many furries use their persona as their primary representation within the fandom. So as far as my personal interpretation goes, as the furry fandom expanded through the 90s and early 2000s, the purpose of fursuiting gradually shifted from portraying a character to representing the person behind the suit. This is particularly interesting in understanding the mechanics behind furries who own multiple suits and multiple personas, which I would say all can cater to a specific period of their lives. So we have now the notion of I present myself as this character within this group of people, which contrasted directly with I play this character from the previous decade. The moment fursuiting became tied to personal identity, the rules surrounding it naturally begin to evolve. During the early decades, a successful fursuit was often judged by how effectively it maintained the illusion. Consequently, any visible trace of the person underneath could be seen as breaking the performance. However, once the purpose of the suit shifted towards self-expression, authenticity started competing with immersion as a core value. This contradiction is what makes me think there's little logic to fursuiting, but at the same time helps me understand that social dynamics changed and that our whole fandom became a tool to express ourselves and to become something new. Suddenly, showing parts of the human behind the character was no longer necessarily a failure of performance. It could become part of the character itself. This is perhaps best illustrated by the growing acceptance of poodling nowadays, and the popularity of outfit-focused fursuiting as well. Now you can easily combine your fursuit with the myriad of clothing styles that reflect who you are, but most importantly, what makes you feel comfortable. On a similar note, gym furs are a perfect example of this phenomenon. Rather than hiding their body behind a complete illusion, many deliberately integrate athletic wear and muscular factions into the presentation as a form of art. This effect is thus significant because it reveals a change in priorities. The modern fursuit is no longer expected to erase the wearer. Instead, it often serves as a bridge between the wearer and the character, allowing both identities to coexist in the same visual space. Something that I struggled to understand when I first joined the fursuiting side of the fandom was, how does it all work? At the beginning, it was all about performance, but then identity came into place and reshaped the whole game that I understood fursuiting to be. But still something core is missing, and that is what I understand as the communal bond that fursuiting cares about. The answer was there all the time, and that is the way to understand the lack of logics that fursuiting can pose. It is illogical if you try to isolate fursuiting as a solo practice and you understand it from an individualistic perspective. That's where you're wrong. Fursuiting is a group activity. It happens in a fandom, and it's mainly driven by not only what it represents to you, but what it represents to the social group. Nowadays, people don't only connect through the characters they create, they also do so through the artists who bring those characters to life, forming communities around makers, styles, and a common aesthetic. Yeah, I mentioned before the essence of body expression like the gyms fur community and the fashion furs, but alongside these sub-communities, you can find fursuit families. This term is exclusive to the modern times, and it's actually a core example that human beings are social creatures which will always exist because there is another individual acknowledging their existence. I I know that sounds horribly far-fetched and maybe even complicated to understand, but let me elaborate on an example. Nowadays, people don't only connect through the likes they have, but much rather through group dynamics which make you feel you belong in a certain category. In the early years, making a costume was largely an individual endeavor. You either played a character, and since the market for makers was practically non-existent, the notion of a fursuit family was not in the picture yet. Today, however, fursuiting exists within a vast range of makers. You don't simply own a fursuit anymore now. Certain makers are immediately recognizable because of their styles, and as a result, commissioning a fursuit grants you that sense of personal belonging to a group who shares a common line, something that makes you stand out as, hey, I recognize your fursuit style. You are from this maker, right? And silly as it sounds, that becomes a family. Nowadays, it's common to see groups of fursuiters gathering because they share the same maker. This group dynamics helps you in a basic human need, which is that of making friends. In a fascinating way, the fursuit style becomes a social language. The effects of this group dynamic is that fursuiting no longer functions solely as an interaction between a performer and an audience. It literally helps people bond through the looks of their fursuits. At the same time, performance never truly disappeared from the question, and that can directly show the heritage that these past traditions had. Silent acting or some sort of specific sound you make, together with body language, are still fundamental tools that help a character feel alive. When we see species like the Dutch angel dragon, a common feature is the squeaky sound, something which dates back to the silent nature of a performance and which nowadays is tied to the cuteness that the character itself has. I mean, who doesn't like Dutchies? Come on. On a broader scale, traditional practices such as avoiding breaking the magic or discouraging poodling still remain present in parts of the fandom. Nowadays, many of us joke about it because we understand the historical context behind it. Yet, some of the older figures in our community continue to find its value when organizing large-scale fursuiting events, for example. One of the most obvious could be Anthrocon's Fursuit Parade, which in recent years has evolved well into surpassing 3,000 participants. Yes, I understand that from a pure practical perspective, pooling is often more comfortable. I mean, logically speaking, exposing your arms on a hot summer day in Pittsburgh makes far more sense than standing in a full-body suit. Yet, somewhat paradoxically, encouraging a more traditional presentation can actually make an event easier to manage. I had the opportunity to discuss this with Kage at a convention, and he explained that one of the biggest challenges when organizing this parade is preventing participants from overheating while they wait to go out. Consequently, by encouraging suitors to approach the parade as a dedicated fursuiting only activity without poodling, the dynamics improved and it was easier to manage the whole event. That was the benefit from going back to the roots. No poodling was a usual tool in this case. You might like it, you might not like it, but it is a clear example of tradition coming back to the picture through the old characters of our community. But at the end of the day, we can all agree that fursuiting makes no sense at all. Sometimes it works as performative, some other times it helps feel more connected with our characters or with a particular part of our lives, and some other times it just helps us be cute online. If we separate the art from its origin, it will naturally lose its meaning. And that is what happens when we try to understand fursuiting as an isolated practice. It's not that we see a crazy person on an animal costume playing around under the sun in the middle of summer. We are witnessing years of history, art, and more importantly, the nature of self-expression that a big animal costume can bring along. Understanding fursuiting as a collective activity will shed light on your understanding of not only a core part of our fandom, but also on how social dynamics work and how our fandom has evolved throughout the years. Social activities are defined by group dynamics. Do they make any sense at all sometimes? Well, no, they don't. But as I said before, when the group defines the meaning behind it, it finds its logical pattern. Fursuiting only caters to a specific need that makes sense on its own within the community it represents. This context is exclusive to furries, and that's why towards the outside world, it may sound a bit illogical. But what do you think? Leave a comment telling me what your take on fursuiting is. You might find people who share actually your same opinion. Similarly, if you found this video interesting, please leave a like and share it with some of your friends. They might also find this topic interesting and maybe it helps you explain what fursuiting can mean to you too. But as for me, I hope to see you all in my next video. Take good care of yourselves, everyone. Meow!
I forgot to say hi everyone, this is Zali the Fox.